This is milestone 1 for CS499, which is a code review of 3 artifacts I've chosen for my final project. I will review these artifacts with this checklist and then go over my enhancements for each artifact. So the first artifact I have is an assignment from CS260 that takes data from a CSV file and stores that data inside a binary search tree. Alright, so the first checklist item is, does the code implement the design? No, there are incomplete functions in the code here, down here, which the destructor and in-order function is not completed. All right, next we have, does the code conform to coding standards? Yes, the code looks pretty clean and readable. Is the code well structured and formatted? Yes, the code is well formatted, but the code could be structured better since the file is close to 400 lines of code, which is very long. Are there any unneeded procedures or unreachable code? Nope, that looks all good. All things are needed. Are there any leftover stubs or test routines? No, there was no test routines or anything left within the code. Can any of the code be replaced with external components or library functions? Yes, lots of the code could be taken out and reused elsewhere, kind of like the binary class here, right here. That can kind of be taken out and stored in a separate class file. Next is the storage use efficient? Yes, storage looks good on here. Next is, are there any magic numbers? The only magic numbers I could find were when loading data from the CSV file here, which is kind of just picking out the row numbers, or column numbers I should say. Are any of the modulars excessively complex or should be restructured? Nope, all the functions look pretty simple and clean that are in the file. Alright, so next is documentation. So is the code clearly and well documented with easy to maintain comments? Yes, all the comments are explained well and kind of demonstrate what the code is doing and are consistent throughout the code. Alright, next is the variables section. Are all variables properly defined with good names? Yes, all variables have clear and consistent names. Do all variables have type consistency? Yes, variables all have proper types. Are there any redundant variables? Nope, all variables have been used that have been created. Next is arithmetic operations, and there were no arithmetic operations within this code, so I'll skip that one. Alright, so next, loops and branches. Are the loops, branches, and logic constructs complete, correct, and properly nested? Yes, everything looked pretty well. I got some examples here. Here, everything is kind of properly nested and looks good. Our most common test cases first. Are the most common case tested first in the if-else chains? Yes, they are. This kind of, another example. We'll check for the null pointer before reading the rest of the code. Are all cases covered in an else or case blocks? No, there's one switch statement that does not have a default down here, so that will have to be fixed. Are loop termination conditions obvious and achievable? Yes, they all look pretty good, the ones that I saw. Are indexes or subscripts properly initialized just prior to a loop? I think the only for loop I have in here that has any things are up here, and it's properly initialized to I and to 0. Can any statements that are enclosed within loops be placed outside of loops? No, everything that was needed inside the loop was in there that needs to be there. Does the code avoid manipulating the index variable? No. Again, the only kind of for loop is I, and it properly does a for loop. Alright, next is defensive programming. Are indexes tested against array bounds? Yes, the for loop uses the row count to test against the CSV file, which is up here. Are important data and import arguments tested for validity and completeness? No, again down here in 3, line 344. We just kind of take the user input as choice here, and it just kind of needs more validation. Are all output variables assigned? Yes, they are all assigned. Is every memory allocation deallocated? Again, the destructor was not complete, but it should remove it from memory once the program terminates. There are no external devices accessing this program. Are files checked for existence before attempting to access them? I'm not sure. They use another file here, a CFC parser, so I'm not sure if they check to see if the file exists before. And again, are all files and devices left in correct state upon termination? Not sure if the file is correctly, again, since I'm not sure about that file. Alright, so for my enhancements for this first artifact is to find the next file that I'm also going to be reviewing, which is a file that stores data in a hash table. So I just want to combine that to one program. And doing so will demonstrate my skill as designing a program. The next enhancement will be to change the binary search tree to an AVL tree, which is a self-balancing binary tree. This enhancement will help improve the performance and consistency of the search function by making sure the tree is always balanced. And by completing these enhancements, I have demonstrated the third and fourth course outcome of designing a program to solve by using computer science practices and algorithms. Alright, so then the next artifact I have is also an assignment from CS499. The application again takes data from a CSV file but stores the data in a hash table instead of a binary search tree. Alright, so the next I will go over the list a little quicker since it's all the same questions. So the structure of the code is well formatted and correctly implements the design. The coding standard looks good. There are no unneeded procedures or unreachable code. There are no leftover test routines in the code. The code again is kind of just very large again, so it can be broken down into separate classes because again this code is close to 400 lines of code. There were no blocks of code that were repeated. The storage use is efficient. The only magic numbers again is just to iterate through the CSV file, which is right there. And none of the functions look excessively complex. And again, the commenting or documentation, the code is well commented and explains what each part of the code does. And variables, again, all the variables are well defined with many meaningful and clear names, and all variables have proper type, and there are no unused variables within the code. And next again, arithmetic operations. There are no arithmetic operations inside the code, so I'll skip that one. Alright, so again, all the loops and FL statements are properly nested. Use this example here. Again, the FL statements have the most common case tested first. There is again a missing default case down here in main that's missing in a switch statement. Loop termination conditions are obvious and achievable. The index is initialized in the for loop, which again is up here. The only one was for iterating through the CSV file. No statements in any loops can be placed outside the loop. The code does not avoid manipulating the index code here. Again, it's iterating by one every loop. The index in loops is tested against file bounds again for the row count under defensive programming here. Again, the user input is not validated down here, so that's going to have to be beefed up a little bit. And again, then the file, I'm not sure because it uses the same kind of CSV parser file, so I need to make sure that everything is properly, making sure everything is properly there before opening the file and making sure that all the files are closed. So again, my enhancement of this code is to combine the first artifact with combine this artifact with the first artifact into a singular program. Alright, and then my last artifact is an assignment from CS340, which allowed a user to interact with a Mongo database by adding CRUD functionality. Right, so, and then I'll go through these kind of quick again. The code correctly adds the functionality that was needed. The code is well and consistently formatted. There are no unneeded procedures. There are no leftover test routines. None of the code can be replaced with external components or libraries. There is no repeated blocks of code, and the storage is efficient as well. There are no magic numbers in the code, and none of the code is excessively complex. And then for documentations, the code, as you can see, is well documented and what it does. Next is variables. All the variables are defined with meaningful and clear names and have proper type, and there are no unused variables. And again, there is no arithmetic operations in the code. And there are no loops in this code as well, so I can skip those two. And then all if-else code have the most common tested first. Kind of up here it says tested if it's not empty. And then it looks like all cases have been covered in the if-else statements as well. All right, next is defensive programming. I will kind of, by fixing all the security exploits in this artifact, we'll demonstrate the course outcome number 5 by showing that I have security mindset with defensive programming. By completing this programming, I've just demonstrated course outcome number 2 of delivering professional quality oral and visual communications. Right, and this completes my code review for CS499.